I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Garner, who's a postdoc who started last year working with me at Cornell. And amongst many of her hats, she works on GREAT as well. And today she'll be moderating our panel on gender-focused research in a breeding program, skills and training for success. So it's my pleasure to welcome Elizabeth, please.
Thank you so much, Holly, and welcome everyone to day 2 of the symposium. I'm very excited to be a part of this really great discussion. So at GREAT, as we've been discussing, we train teams of researchers working in crop improvement. Breeders, agronomists, pathologists join together with their colleagues from all types of social science backgrounds, agricultural economics, rural sociology, and anthropology. This is because we believe our crop improvement system should value the voices of social scientists in designing and implementing breeding programs as much as it values opinions of breeders, agronomists, and pathologists. As you've heard, GREAT has helped to achieve this. However, for most of our social scientists, their journey into gender research did not start or end with GREAT. Before I introduce the panel, I just want to invite all participants today to respond to the questions as I'm asking them in the Q&A box. I know that we have such a great variety of experiences, and so I know as the GREAT management team, we'd also like to hear how you've come into gender research, what training you've had, and what training needs you see moving forward in the future. So again, please put comments in the Q&A, and if you have questions for the panelists, please put them there as well. I'm going to introduce my panelists now, and as I introduce them, please turn on your videos. So our first panelist, I'm pleased to introduce, is Eileen Nchanji. She's a gender specialist working in the Pan-Africa Bean Research Alliance with Alliance of Bioversity International and International Center for Tropical Agriculture. Eileen leads gender research and development across 32 countries in Africa and also works with the CGIAR research program under the Grain, Legumes, and Dryland Cereals Working Group. She's a feminist to the core and believes in equal opportunities and fairness for all. She works across disciplines and sectors to achieve this through capacity building and participatory programs. Eileen holds a PhD in social anthropology. Well, welcome, Eileen. There you are. Good afternoon. Our second panelist, who you just heard give a great presentation, is Natson Amengor. He is a senior research scientist at the Crop Research Institute in Kumasi, Ghana. He has been working as a socioeconomist with the Institute for about 8 years, collaborating with researchers nationally, regionally, and internationally. He's a visiting scientist at the Von Thunen Institute of Farm Economics in Brunswick, Germany. He believes that climate smart and adapted technologies with gendered considerations have the ability to make Ghana, Africa, and the world food secure. He holds a master's in economics and is currently an agricultural economics PhD candidate with the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. So welcome, Natson. Our last but not least is Losira Sanya. She is a PhD social scientist, currently working as a lecturer in the Department of Extension and Innovation Studies in Makerere University, Uganda. If you joined the panel, if you joined the symposium yesterday, you also heard a great moderation. Prior to joining Makerere, she worked for the National Agriculture Research Organization in Uganda as a senior research officer in monitoring and evaluation. She has over 15 years of extensive strategic, adaptive, and applied research experience. Her research interests are in agricultural and rural innovation systems and management, value chain development, communication for development, and gender responsiveness of agricultural research and extension systems, and how these stimulate technology uptake. She holds a PhD in agricultural and rural innovation and an a Master's of Science in Agricultural Economics with additional professional training. So thank you all for joining. I will, Natson, if you don't mind turning your video back on, we can highlight all 3 of you while you're on the panel, but do please keep your microphones muted while other panelists are responding. So thank you. So we will start off this panel by just talking about some of your background and how you came into gender-focused research. So you all have a level of experience designing and conducting gender-focused research related to crop improvement. How did you become involved in research that focuses on gender? And was it through formal training in gender, or was it more informal or experiential? And Eileen, we'll start with you, please.
Yeah, so Elizabeth, thank you and greetings to all our participants, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. So for me, gender started more from just my upbringing. My mom brought us up in a way that men and women did the same thing in the house. My brothers were cooking and was also expected to do certain activities which were considered, for men. So going forward to doing my master's and my BSc and my PhD, I was always interested just to understand whatever I was studying, how that affected women or how women fared in that particular area. So it started more as a curiosity. And then moving forward, when I started working with the Alliance, it became more solidified, shifting from just looking at gender. So what are men or what are women doing to actually looking more at how other intersectionality elements come into play. So looking at the world, looking at the age, the ethnicity. And I think when I actually had the great training then, that's when it shifted more towards, how can gender scientists, for example, work with a breeder. So that's really just how my gender journey has been. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Eileen. Natson, do you want to follow?
Yeah, sure, definitely. Growing up, thank you anyway, Elizabeth, and nice to meet you all. Growing up, I come from a family of all boys, and growing up in our home, there was nothing that was meant for women or for men. All the duties were for us to do. So for me, gender wasn't too much an issue that I thought was out there that people are actually interested in, because I didn't see the difference between a man and a woman in terms of the duties and other things. So at a point as I progressed, I got into the university, started work. I attempted writing a gender paper, but in my mind's eye, I was just looking at sex disaggregated data, looking at male and female and assuming they mean the same thing for men and women. So at the end of the day, I wrote the paper all right, and I got an opportunity to publish it. Thereafter, I got in touch with Grace, and I got training. After the training or during the training, I realized that there was more to gender than I had ever thought. And the perceptions and the ideas that I held were different from what I was actually listening to, which was even more closer to reality than before. If I am to rewrite that paper today, I'm sure I would write a better paper than I submitted or published previously. But then too, I would also love to leave that paper the way it is as a reminder that there was a time I didn't know much, but now I know better. So in subsequent papers, I think gender will play a key role, like will stand out clearer than I used to know. And I have great to thank for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Losira?
Okay, thank you so much, our moderator. Thank you, fellow panelists and all our participants joining. My journey with the gender-focused research started off in 2014 while on a participatory market chain approach project with Ms. Sarah Mayanja from SIG. Along the 3 phases of implementing the PMCA process, we realized the need to be more intentional on activities that go beyond just women's participation to benefiting them. And prior to this PMCA process, I'd been part of the National Agricultural Research Program under the Beans Research Program, where I was working as a research scientist. And this program is mandated to generate new crop varieties. While at the beans program, we targeted mainly to involve women, especially in participatory plant breeding. And the focus was mainly during the participatory variety selection process. At that time, the focus was mainly on how do we have women participate in our activities, engage in the trials, be part of the demonstrations, the trainings, participate in the field days, among others. At that time, honestly, I looked at gender more as being about women and their involvement in participatory variety selection. However, when I joined the GREAT training, where I'm a fellow of the Theme 1 RTB cohort, it became clear to me that gender-focused research is not just about women participation. Gender-focused research goes beyond just their participation to understand the gender-differentiated needs and preferences of men, women, young men, the youth, as well as their priorities and constraints and how this shape technology generation and uptake. I was able to recognize the fact that gender is more than just a consideration at the participatory variety selection stage, but it spans all the way the stages of a breeding process. And when I joined GREAT, I was by then pursuing my PhD research that focused on banana technology development process. And this kind of understanding helped me refocus my research to integrate gender differentiated trait preferences as part of my PhD research. That's my journey, moderator.
Thank you all so much for sharing those experiences. I just want to let all the attendees know that we did not solicit them to mention GREAT specifically, but we do appreciate that how much that is tied into their journey. I also just want to recognize how much I appreciate you all bringing in that it's both the informal and experiential that have opened your eyes to gender and how that has been formalized through specific training. So I appreciate that. The next question, moving on. Now that you are conducting gender-focused research, how did your position as a social scientist prepare you for this or not? And what are the gaps in formal and informal training that you have received or that you know about? And Natson, if we can start with you this time, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Elizabeth. I would have been under the mistaken assumption that being a social scientist had prepared me enough or gave me more insight into the gender issues until I had to present my proposal to a group of social scientists. And I had one of them telling me that this whole gender thing is a myth. Then I realized that no, it is not really about being a social scientist. It might have some role to play, but being a social scientist necessarily didn't prepare me for that. It gave that clearer, because for somebody that I thought was a social scientist who knew more, who understood things better, to have said that, it came clearer to me that just informal training or having any form of training, whether for informal or getting any information anywhere, wouldn't be enough until we make it a purpose that we really want to sell out this gender principles to other people. Because for the group of people, as I said, I was working with or presenting to, I was so much thinking that this is a group that will embrace everything that I was bringing about. But then I realized that there was indeed a huge gap between what we know and what it should be. So for me, I think I will say that the gap in here to be filled is to intensify formal training for gender. Let us not assume that being a social scientist makes it easier. Let us not also assume that maybe working in an institution where they talk about gender issues will mean that everybody in there carries the same message. We need to combine the informal with the formal, go down to the communities, and also train the technocrats that we have. In that way, I think we can make progress. But to be frank, that interaction or that experience told me that we had more to do in terms of selling our gender concepts. Thank you.
Thank you, Natson. Losira, do you want to follow?
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much, moderator. My position as a social scientist stems from varied backgrounds, right from a rural sociologist, where I started off at my bachelor's degree, to an agriculture economist, and then rural innovation practitioner. This diverse background has shaped the way in which I look at research and also communities that benefit from research efforts. As a social scientist, I had a keen interest in working with people that blend interpersonal communication and facilitation skills, which were very critical for me to bridge the gap between breeders and the farming communities. On one end, you need to communicate to the farmers the technologies coming through research effort, and on the other hand, you need to provide feedback to the breeders. This is not an easy task, and it calls for real partnership between the different disciplines in a breeding program. For example, you need the disciplines to appreciate the role and advantage that each brings on board for an effective breeding system that can deliver product profiles that meet the needs of the end users along specific commodity value chains. And in terms of the gaps in training, there is need for more emphasis on gender issues that go beyond the binary categories, to look at issues to do with the intersectionality in research, in gender-focused research. We need to be intentional in the way as social scientists we contribute to the gender narrative, to go beyond the binary categorization of men and women, to appreciate the fact that even within women, there are different facets at play, and these contribute and create differences even within women as a category. And this needed to be addressed as we deepen our understanding of gender in gender-focused research. With that mentioned, I want to appreciate the effort that has been invested by different projects. Great, the GBI initiative, the Gender Breeding Initiative, the CG platform, especially RTB Foods and other funding agencies towards this call in a bid to transform agricultural systems. Over to you, moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm just going to remind attendees, if you have questions for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A box. And Eileen, do you mind answering the question as well?
So Elizabeth, thanks, and thanks to my other panelists for bringing those points. So I would just move forward and say, as a social anthropologist, we had no option than to actually stay in the field to understand the context we were working with, to understand the culture of the people. I meant for my PhD, I had to spend about 3 years in Tamale, that's in northern Ghana. And what that does is it gives you, builds your skills to be able to interact with people, to be able to trust people, to get people to understand your side, but also for you to push aside your biases and understand where the other person is coming from. And I think those skills as a social scientist really helped me when I started getting into gender. Definitely, it started more of just understanding what roles men are playing, what are the responsibilities they have, how does the culture sort of like reconstruct what they expected to do, how can you reconstruct that structural barriers that are already prevalent. But I think what really was important most was the training that came with it, because it's one thing to understand what men and women are doing, it's another to really be targeted, to really influence that change. So what indicators are you using? If you need to have a discussion with a breeder, I mean, he has a lot or she has a lot that they are doing. How are you strategic about the collaborations that can happen? How are you strategic about where you can actually contribute, not just telling the person what to do, but how do you do it together? Which tools are available? I mean, Hale presented a really nice diagram that shows at different points in the breeding priority system, where can we bring in gender and what are the outcomes that we expect? That's really very important. Larissa talked about the RTB work that's happening. SIP as well is doing some work on the gender tools. We have G+ customer profiling tool. We have the G+ profiling tool. But I think also what is important is how then do we make sure that others who are interested in gender work are able to access this tool, are able to understand it so that they can work, very well with the breeders. How do we get the breeders to understand the value that we bring as gender scientists to the work that they're doing? I think I would stop there. Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
No, thank you all so much. I would just highlight one thing that I'm hearing from each of you is that, of course, so being a social scientist does not make you a gender specialist, but also just how rich and deep understanding gender is. And so for each of us, it's been a point of beginning and then moving forward and deeper into understanding the dynamics that are gender, and not just looking at 2 points of data and the relationships or differences between them. So I appreciate all of that. I think that's been highlighted in the chat box too, is really appreciating the moving beyond sex disaggregated to sex disaggregated data and understanding gender dynamics. And also, Losira, as you pointed out as well, that we need to think about the differences within gender, within genders and between them. And that actually leads to one question we had. So right now we're going to open it up to some questions from the audience, and I'll just pull one from the chat box. I think feeds off of this, but all 3 of your examples is just asking for a definition and discussion of intersectionality, perhaps an example for those who may not have experience with the term and how it applies in our work. I might point to Losira because I think this is in direct to you, but I would like to hear from the other panelists too, if you have other examples. Thank you, Losira.
Okay, thank you so much, moderator. Maybe just in simple terms, when I talk about to go beyond the binary, to focus on intersectionality issues is recognizing the fact that, as I said, that even among women, there could be differences. Even among men, there are differences. Issues that link to understanding how aspects, for example, of their personal social identities do combine with other aspects to be able to create differences, for example, in the way in which they access technologies, in the way in which they select the technologies, in the way in which they use the technologies and benefit from these technologies. Yesterday, we had a wonderful presentation from one of the COP fellows, Lutz, who tried actually to try to understand a little more about mechanizing Mang Bin. And he tried to bring out some of these issues to do with intersectionality, how the landless women in Miami were being affected by the mechanization process. So if you consider them all as women, you will be losing out. But then when you go further to look at women, the women who have access to resources, for example, those with access to land, those with access to technology, those with education, given a given race, there could be differences in the way in which they do benefit, for example, from a breeding program. Yes, over to you, moderator, and other panelists.
Yes, thank you. Natson, did you want to respond?
Yeah, just quickly, just to add up, that's to say that just picking data from like a group of people and just saying that this is for farmers, this is for the women, and this is for the men is not enough. There are underlying issues. So just looking at the men against the women wouldn't give you the true picture. But then we need to explore what actually accounts for those pictures that we are seeing, for those variations, for those differences. Then we can get a clearer picture. So if Losira says we shouldn't look at the binary, I think all she is trying to say is that let's go deeper than what we see. There are a lot of underlying issues or undercurrents that can give us a clearer picture. Thank you.
Thank you. Eileen, did you want to add as well?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think they've talked about issues of wealth, but ethnicity as well. You know, even the social class you're from, even the geographical location where you are, someone in the base of a pyramid area and someone in a high class area, if you want to introduce certain food, you need to be aware of that as well. Even the age also is important, and also generational issues. So someone who is old and someone who is much younger have different interests. And so you need to understand this to be able to target them. So it's all about understanding the target. I think I'd stop there. Thanks.
Those are all great points. And if I might add as well, I think space and time also shape gender dynamics as well. I think when we think about intersectionality, it's not only that there's one identity that is shaping your experience of the world, but also that, so like you have all mentioned, age, class, ethnicity, interact with gender identities in order to have unique experiences of oppression or even privilege, and that can even change over space and time. So it's really important that we continue to do the work beyond. The surveys are great time point catches, but looking at dynamics is also really essential to understanding gender. I'm just going to switch. We have another question from James here in the Q&A box. Is how is uptake and implementation of recommendations from gender-focused research by policymakers and government agencies, such as ministries of agriculture, especially in sub-Saharan Africa? So how have you been able to get your message out about the importance of gender-focused research, and how has that been uptaken by policymakers or even others? Do you have any experiences you want to share? Yes, Eileen.
So Elizabeth, I can take that. Thank you very much. So with the Pan-African Beans Research Alliance, we work across 3 networks in 32 countries. And basically we work with the National Agricultural System. So we have coordinators who actually have a buy-in to make sure that gender is part of the activities that they carry out. So that's the first thing that needs to happen. Well, there has to be gender mainstreamed, but also there has to be strategic gender research. So it's not just a box that you have to tick. Definitely, we also have discussions with like regional blocks like ASERECA. So what that means is the countries on the ASERECA also have this higher mandate to make sure that gender is integrated in the activities. So that way, it's not just international organizations, but you have the buy-in from the government. Also, even with the NAS, when usually we have meetings, whether they're breeders meetings or network meetings, we make sure that the Minister of Higher Education, agriculture, because these really all interact, health are all present. And we are able to explain to them how investing in gender is actually a pathway or the entry point to being able to achieve all the sustainable development goals. And when you have the government, when you have the private sector, when you have the international bodies understand the importance of gender and how that pushes the economy ahead, you would definitely have the activities, I won't say move very smoothly, but gives you space within which you can actually make sure that gender research work is done, evidence is generated, and then definitely this influences policy in the country. Thanks.
Very nice, excellent. I'm actually going to, if that was so well done, Eileen. I hope the other panelists don't mind. I'm going to go to one more question for sake of time. This is from Richard Miro in our chat box, and he asks, given that gender is dynamic, do any of the panelists have any experience in observing or facilitating change in gender norms during any of their projects? And if yes, what gender norms did they see changing, and how did they see these changed gender norms faring with time? And so I'll ask Losira or Natson, maybe if either of you have experience with this.
Can I have the question again? I probably didn't get it all.
So sorry, Richard is asking if you have observed any gender dynamics changing, and if so, how did they change? And if you can share that experience in any of the projects that you've worked with.
Oh, okay. Sure. I've worked on maize, worked on sweet potato, and I've worked on rice as well. But one key experience I'll share in this regard is one maize community where there happened to be a woman who owns machines like mechanization equipment from whom the men come to hire. The men come to her to hire this mechanization equipment. And it has given them a different perception about women in that particular community, because all along they were thinking that there is no way a woman can do something better than the men can do it. But here is a settler who has come to be in the community over a period of time, has been able to work hard, has huge farm sizes than the men, has the ability to bring technical knowledge to his field from the research institutions and the extension services. And she called the men to come and listen. So then the community started thinking about women differently. And for one interaction that I had with them, I had one of the men saying that, oh, from now on, she's going to give her wife a very large field because she's realized that the women can manage large fields, meaning previously they were not giving them that. So I think if we are exposing the community, as I said earlier, not just looking at the formal, but the informal, both of them, and we are exposing the communities to some of the changes that can come about as a result of giving equal opportunity or being equitable in terms of distributing this for both men and women in terms of farming, then the whole community stands to benefit. So that's one experience I can share with Richard and all of us on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Losira, or Eileen, do either of you have other experiences you'd like to share?
Yeah, so thanks, Elizabeth. Maybe I just say something on. Oh, Losira, please, you can go ahead.
Eileen, continue, it's okay.
Thanks, Losira. You've always been a very good friend and a darling, so yeah. So I just wanted to raise one point. A lot of the time when we talk about changes in practice, we mostly look at maybe a woman being able to do something that she wasn't able to do before, but I want to lean a little bit towards the men. So when we had like nutrition trainings and awareness creations, usually you would have only women come because the men would say, you know, this is an activity only for women. And what we did differently this time around was actually get men and women together and start the questions from who buys food, prepares food, who is the one who determines what is being eaten. And it was interesting because the men were like, you know what, we are also involved in this activity. We didn't think we were, we just assumed nutrition is cooking and it's women who do the cooking. But what I realized in Kenya and Nakuru was like, the men were the ones who determined what would be eaten. And in most cases were the ones who bought the food for the household. So it's important for the men to know, you know, the quality of food, the nutrients available in food, so that when they are going to buy the food, there's a consensus on, you know, the nutritional and the health benefits of that food. So that was basically what we saw from the gender responsive nutrition training that we had. Change of attitude of men towards, you know, issues of food in the household, being aware now that, you know, they have an important role to play, and we're actually seeing those changes happen.
Thank you, Eileen. Losira, do you want to add? Losira, are you still there? Oh, you're mute. Losira, if you want to add your, there you go. Okay, good.
Okay. Briefly, I would talk about a project that I talked about earlier before, the PMCA project that we are implementing within the central region of Uganda. And we had issues whereby more of the participants within this project were women who were growing leafy vegetable crops. And our project aimed at enhancing market access for leafy vegetables. And we realized through the process of implementing the project that though women were mainly the main participants in production of the vegetables, within the region where we're implementing, Uikwe district, they couldn't move away from their home to take the vegetables to the market. So through the project we are implementing, we tried as much as possible to work together with these women and also the male members of their household to try and involve them in the meetings that we are having. And even when we go for the monitoring activities, we would call upon them to come and be part of the field visit so that they can be able to understand what does this project mean for their spouses, but also to the entire household. And through this process, we saw some change in the way that women slowly by slowly began taking their vegetables to the market, and that was a market nearby, not very distant, but also to help them benefit from other distant markets that offered better prices. We kind of created linkages between them and these traders and also seed companies. And over time, until today as I speak, right from 2011, these farmers are still engaged in vegetable production. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all so much. I think these are excellent examples of how even just as a community, we're starting to move more from just being gender aware and collecting data and understanding more about gender and moving into gender transformative work where we're trying to think about how we can use this knowledge to start making change. And I think you all gave great examples on that. So I apologize, we ran over time. So I will actually, we had one more question, but perhaps I'll ask each of the panelists to answer it in the chat box, if that's okay. I know that you had great answers and I don't want the audience to miss out on it. And also I'll invite again, the audience to also answer the question. So I'll put it in the chat box, but just going forward, what skills or training do you feel there is more need of to support social scientists within crop improvement institutions to conduct gender-focused research? And so I will leave everyone with that thought because I think that is also moving us into the next phase of GREAT and looking forward to more presentations. I cannot thank these panelists enough. I'm seeing great responses in the chat box. I also want to point to a resource that Lillian and Holly shared in there from Oxfam, from the Gender Action Learning System that I think also highlights the work that you all are doing. And I'm just going to give you a round of applause on behalf of the audience. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.